Okay, today I'm going to talk about Manage in Place with Alfresco. The way Alfresco normally manages content is through a content service speaking directly to a file system. With Simflofy, we're able to replace that content service with our own, giving us access to several different ECMs and content management platforms. Using Manage in Place with Alfresco is easy to configure and should provide a very seamless experience for users. For most implementations, users won't even know that the content is living outside of the Alfresco repository. So what does Manage in Place mean, and what does that look like in Alfresco? Well, if I upload a file directly to Alfresco, and then take a look at the Alfresco properties, we'll see a property called CM Content. CM Content is actually a group of properties that houses all the information about the binary content that's being managed. The main property we're interested for Manage in Place is the content URL. Here you can see the content URL points to a store name and then a timestamp propagated path to the actual binary file. So when a user downloads or streams content, Alfresco will know to pull the content from this location. What our service does is replaces that URL with one used by the Simflofy content service. That URL will tell Alfresco that Simflofy is managing that content and to stream it directly through Simflofy. So how do we create that URL? Well, the first thing we want to do is import all of the metadata and the URL into Alfresco from our source system. So here I have a job set up, and if we take a look at the job, you'll see that I have a file system repository connection and an Alfresco output connection. I also have an authentication connection for Alfresco. If we look at the authentication connection for Alfresco, you'll see that I have some basic connection information, including the URL and the credentials to connect to that Alfresco system. You also see down here I have a box checked called Create Content URL Always. This tells Simflofy that we need to generate or attempt to generate the content URL for the object that we're moving from the source system. So if we look at the advanced configuration, one thing to point out is that the include binary option is not checked. So this means that when we do the migration, we'll send over all the metadata that we capture from the source system, but we won't send the binary file for that document. We also have a batch size, so when we output to Alfresco, we'll do it in batches, and this is where we can configure that. So I'm just going to save this. Now, if you look at the repository connection configuration information in the job view, you can see that I'm just pulling files from a local file system. So let's take a look at that folder. So here's the source directory for all of the files that I'll be migrating in this job. So you can see we have some images, some documents, and some alternate media files in here. Okay, so now that we have everything configured, we can go ahead and run the job. So I'm just going to click the Run button here. And this will do the migration from the file system location to Alfresco. Once everything gets into Alfresco, we'll be able to take a look and see the difference between content that's being managed in place versus content that's been uploaded manually. Okay, we can see the job's completed. We've read 20 files and we've written 20 files. So let's go take a look at Alfresco. So let's refresh our repository view. Okay, now we can see that the Simflofy folder was created. And we should have a file layout similar to what our file system source looked like. So let's go take a look at an image. So here you can see Alfresco was able to create the preview. But now let's go look at the content store URL that we had looked at for a file that was uploaded. Note that the content URL is a little bit different. We are no longer using the store. We are instead pointing to localfs. So what is localfs? Well, if we go back into Simflofy under Federation and click on Content Service Connections, we can see that we have a local file system connection called localfs. So not a lot of configuration here, but we do have the source folder. And then we have a couple of configuration items for manage in place. One being deep delete, which indicates whether we're allowed to delete content in the source system. The other one is the prefix, which gets appended to the content URL. So with this content URL, our custom content service is able to reroute the request for content to Simflofy, who then sends it to the content service connector. So let's go take a look at the Earth at Night image on the file system. So what I'm going to do is just do a quick update on this file. You can add an annotation to it. And then let's save the file. Okay, close it. Now let's go back to Alfresco. We'll go back to our Earth at Night image. And let's take a look at the preview now. So you'll notice the change is now showing in Alfresco. So what this indicates is that when we generate a preview in Alfresco, or if we download the content, we're actually going to be streaming it directly from the source repository. In this case, the source was a file system, but the source can be any ECM or repository that we have a content service connection for. Once content is being managed in place, it's very hard for a user to tell the difference between content that lives in the Alfresco default store and content that lives in a remote repository. This makes it easy to apply business processes and track those changes within Alfresco without modifying the source content. Well, what about lazy migration? So what if we want to now take this content and put it into the Alfresco content store? Doing that is very simple. All we need to do is add an aspect called Content Store Selector. And then let's edit the properties. Now you can see there's a store name property, and it's set to default, but you can also see other stores that we have configured for this Alfresco instance. So let's leave it at default and save it. And then what we're going to do is look at that content store URL once again. Now you can see that we've gone back to the default Alfresco format using the date time stamp propagation folder path with the basic store protocol. So that means this file has now been copied to the file system that Alfresco is using as its content store. So that's basically it. What I've shown is moving content into Alfresco while keeping the binaries in place, and then using Simflofy to stream that content to end users in Alfresco.